How do you establish performance metrics? What do you measure?
Metrics are always evolving. In the mid-2000s, we had far less visibility into the user's experience. We were limited to measuring the time between an onload event, when a page finishes loading, and an unload event, which is essentially when a user navigates away from a page. We had to use that as a proxy for the amount of time it took a user to complete whatever action they came to the page to do, because that was one of the few things we could measure. Today we can observe far more, like what people click on or whether they click on anything at all. We can measure how long it takes for a page to be responsive. We can do real user monitoring, RUM, to learn in real time what users are actually doing on a page and how they behave and create metrics based on that, instead of making assumptions about what we think a user might have wanted to do.
It's important to keep real-world usage in mind when determining your metrics and tests. Does your app work when your user is in an underground parking lot, and their connection is weak or unstable? Does your application fail gracefully when a server or resource is unavailable? A surprising number of sites will fail to render if just one JavaScript library fails to load. They might have already downloaded a full megabyte or more of content, but still be unable to view the page.
One of the most important things is understanding your demographic. A lot of developers think, if it's good enough for me, it should be good enough for everyone. That might be true if your demographic happens to use the same network and the same devices you do. But if your demographic is in another country, or using less powerful devices, you should be creating different metrics for that. Developers should always be testing with the actual devices your demographic may use. Every company has different goals as well. Other companies' strategies shouldn't dictate your goals. Once you know your goals, you can start collecting metrics and moving levers to achieve those goals. If you're unsure where to start, run a test with Google's open-source automated web performance auditing and metrics tool Lighthouse and see where things stand.
What tools do you use for testing under suboptimal conditions, such as slow network connections or low-power devices?
I always keep a low-end Android phone on my desk for testing. The one I have right now is fairly new and costs about €60. It has 4G support, but the processor is very slow. I like to occasionally use it as my daily driver instead of my new model iPhone. I found that one popular news site loads in 3 seconds on my iPhone, but takes 30 seconds to load on this low-end Android phone, even though they're on the same network. The difference is the JavaScript. If you can avoid sending heavy JavaScript to low-end phones, you will increase the performance, and thus the reach, of your website. Most users will not wait 30 seconds for a page to load, or will use it only if they have to.
Testing on real devices is great, but when you can't do that, Chrome Developer Tools lets you simulate many different devices and throttle your network speed. I'll mention Lighthouse again. I default to it because it provides such a good baseline.
Back when I worked at Yahoo, I built Boomerang to gather real-world data from actual users. We can use it to assess the network speeds and conditions for users and see what actually happens. Like Ronan said earlier, a page might fail to render if a single JavaScript file is missing, just because a user with a fast network connection happens to step into a spot with a bad signal. Collecting RUM data helps us identify points of failure that we might not see otherwise.
Where do you most often find bottlenecks? Front end? Back end? Both?
I'd say, for most applications, the backend is fairly well optimized because the experience of using it is practically the same for the developer as it is for the user. If SQL queries are taking too long, the developer will optimize them. On the front end, developers tend to have really fast computers with up-to-date browsers. End users don't necessarily have the same experience, which is why you need to test your applications under different conditions. The most common bottleneck is probably third-party JavaScript. These files are outside your control and might not be well cached. It's helpful to reach out to the providers and see if you can bundle them with your own cached JavaScript files.
Marketing trackers are probably the biggest pain point. It may look like you're just adding one line of code to your application, but it could be pulling in megabytes of third-party JavaScript. I'll also mention GraphQL. GraphQL doesn't solve all problems, but it has cut down on the number of back-end issues I see because it reduces the amount of code the front-end receives from the server.
It's easy to get carried away adding more JavaScript libraries, whether that's marketing snippets, UI components, or analytics tools. They're trivially easy to add and provide compelling functionality, but they add up over time. Even a single analytics script can balloon the size of a page. You have to be rigorous in thinking about what you need and where to place it. For example, maybe you shouldn't prioritize large images above the business's address and phone number. The truism is that the less stuff you send to the client, the better it will be for the user. To quote automotive designer Chapman, simplify, then add lightness.
Do you have any tips for keeping performance in mind throughout a project, especially when there are other pressing concerns?
Periodically use a low-end phone all day for everything, not just the things you're working on. It's helpful for remembering why performance matters. It's hard to work backward and try to make something faster after it's already built. You should view performance as a competitive advantage and make it a core goal.
You need to stay aware of your application's performance. Even if you're not doing fancy dashboards, constantly collecting RUM data and looking at it all the time keeps performance central to your work.
We recommend that clients add performance metrics to their continuous integration systems. You can do this easily with Lighthouse 6. Also, incorporate performance metrics and their results into your process so that the metrics are always in view.
Do you have advice for working with other stakeholders in a project? For example, what if someone on the marketing team wants to add a widget with serious performance issues?
This can be a real struggle at a lot of organizations. What helps most is to have a baseline set of performance metrics so that you can quantify what impact a change will have. If you can add revenue numbers to those metrics, you can be more persuasive. That's most straightforward in e-commerce, where you might be able to show a decline in sales relative to how long it takes to interact with a page. You could say, for example, this tracking script or that feature will reduce page loads by 2 seconds, and that will cost us $100,000 in sales.
Exactly. If you have data, you can make more informed decisions. Maybe the performance cost of a new feature is worth it because you expect it will bring in more revenue than you lose by taking a slight performance hit. It goes both ways. Maybe a particular optimization won't be worth the developer hours it will take to implement it.
If you don't have metrics for a specific company, you can talk about third-party research. For example, Microsoft found that users will frequent a site less often if it loads even 250 milliseconds slower than a competitor's. Data is crucial, but it's also important to have stories to go along with it. I keep a bunch of anecdotes to hand, so to speak. For example, an engineer at Google reduced YouTube page loads from more than 1 megabyte to about 100 kilobytes by optimizing the page's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, not the video. But the average page load time went up, which was a complete surprise to the engineer. This was because the smaller page size suddenly enabled entire new geographies to use YouTube. Before, there were countries where it took 10 or 20 minutes just to load a page, let alone play a video. The addressable market for YouTube went up just by making it lighter. I tell people performance is reach. A website with good performance will have more customers,